I'm Bri.
I'm Nick, and this is The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted.
We are a married couple from Atlanta with boring day jobs. We've been together 12 years, and we usually create a lot of weird performance art so that we can entertain people. But we are trying our hand at podcasting because we have had an obsession in the last 6 months. And that obsession is Dungeon Crawler Carl.
Yep,
This is a spoiler podcast where we will be talking about plot points from all 7 Dungeon Crawler Carl books.
that's right. This podcast is going to be completely full of spoilers. If you are looking for a podcast about Dungeon Crawler Carl without spoilers, this is not the place to be. The only information that we're not going to be touching on is information about Book 8 that's available on the Patreon. We wanted to start with Book 7 and go from there because we want to be ready to jump into Book 8 when that comes out sometime next year and then be able to go into talking about the TV show.
Definitely. And just the way that the books are, it didn't make sense to me, at least, to start with book 1 and just describe what happened. I don't think that there's a lot of meaningful content there. There are so many things that are foreshadowing what's coming later that it just
Right.
feels to me like it makes sense to talk about the whole series.
Yeah, that's not going to be nearly as much fun to not be able to say, oh, wait, this leads to this and this leads to this. Not nearly as fun. So I got into Dungeon Crawler Carl first. It was recommended to me by a good friend. I was talking to him and saying that I was really looking for a new book. I had read Robert Evans' book After the Revolution, and I just loved the chaos of it, the post-apocalyptic vibe, how over the top, violent, crazy, ridiculous it was. And my friend was like, you got to check out this series. It's great. But he described it as popcorn literature.
I don't think anything where the apocalypse happens on page 1 is popcorn literature. We actually had the same friend over the other night, and we were telling him a little bit about our podcast research for the next couple of episodes. And he was like, oh, yeah, that got so complicated. I think I put it down, and I was planning on coming back to it later. So I'm not sure he still agrees with that label either.
Yeah, he definitely reneged on that a little bit. Apocalypse doesn't quite happen on page 1, but very, very early on in the book. I started listening to it, and I was hooked immediately. I was listening to it in the car, and they'd just gotten into the dungeon. It was at the point where they got into the tutorial guild, and Bri was in the car with me, and Carl gives the special pet biscuit to Donut, and she turns into like the glob of stuff, and Bri was like, what's happening to the cat? Is the cat okay? If something happens to the cat, I am out.
Definitely. And I will say that it takes a very bold writer to kill a cat in chapter 3. So I think I should have realized that Donut was going to be okay. But someone else that we know said that he also read Kaiju Battlefield Earth and that you should not say things like that because Matt Dinniman might kill the cat in chapter 3.
Yeah, fortunately he didn't. So I was listening, and I think I was on book 2 by the time that Bri decided she was also going to pick up the series. And she is a Olympic speed reader. She's like a freak of nature when it comes to reading. And by the time I was halfway through book 3, she had already finished reading the entire series.
It was really fun because I would have to be like, so has that thing happened yet? And Nikki would be like, what thing? And I was like, you'll know. You'll know when the thing happens.
Yeah, especially when she brought up the Viva la Revolucion, and I just had no idea. And then even when I got to that point, I still had no idea. And that was something we both had to go online after the fact and look up exactly what transpired there. And that's something we'll definitely cover at some point in this series. There's a really unique difference between listening to the audiobooks and reading them because the audiobooks being narrated by Jeff Hayes, he's just such a talented voice actor. I didn't believe that he was the voice actor for all the characters. I just assumed like Matt and Carl were 2 different voice actors. And when I finally found out that it was all just Jeff, I was like mind blown.
If you haven't seen a video of him going through the different voices on YouTube, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun. Seeing him switch back and forth so quickly, it's crazy.
There are still different things that kind of pop out to you as a book reader as opposed to an audio listener. And some of the lines I thought were the funniest in the series weren't really emphasized in the audiobooks in a way that I felt like people were able to recognize. So
At least I wasn't.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines in the series is when Zev is looking at the art show contest and she's looking at the picture like, Carl, I've looked at this a lot and I just don't get it.
Yeah, and like that just kind of went right over my head. I just kept going, maybe the slightest chuckle. Another great example of the listening versus reading experience is in Gate of the Feral Gods when they're underwater and they've escaped the submarine and Carl is coming up through the water and he's got Donut passed out in his arms, and then when she wakes up, the chapter ends with and Donut proceeds to lose her absolute fucking shit. And that was just so hilarious to me. But Brie told me about that scene later on, that when that happened, there was just several pages of like spelled out.
Maybe not 4 or 5 pages, but it goes on for a while. It's definitely one of my favorite parts of the book. Another one of my favorite reading versus listening experiences is you asked me, so when Pepper Tente screams, what does that look like in the book? And I was like, it just says he screamed in my face. And I absolutely love that as well.
Yeah. And in the audiobook, I love hearing the actual scream. Every single time it happens, it gets me. So we want to talk a little bit more about why we love these books, what got us into the books, and what kept it going for us. And for me, it drew me in from the very beginning. Apocalypse, billions of people die. The way that the apocalypse happens, everything with a roof or structure is just flattened immediately. Such a cool way of doing it. And then it starts out and it's just kind of ridiculous and weird and crazy. He gets in there, he's getting chased by a bunch of goblins, he's punching goblins in the face that have pineapples on sticks. You don't really know what's going on. And it's just kind of silly because you have no frame of reference for really what's happening. And then, you know, right after he finishes with the tutorial, and it's the first time they're doing the announcement, and they talk about how within the first hour, from the 11 million that entered, several million people die. And that's when you start kind of seeing the impact of this and how dangerous it is. The video game aspect of it all also really drew me in. I loved having an inventory, having a HUD. I loved the AI giving descriptions of things. It was silly and ridiculous descriptions, and Carl's like, what the hell is even going on here? But it starts to draw you in really quickly especially when they get to the first boss fight and it's the hoarder. I actually speak Spanish fluently. I think that scene is kind of meant to be unnerving anyways, but listening to that and actually understanding what she was saying, I was like, wow, this is kind of fucked up. But later in the series, it's right after the Butcher's Masquerade ends, and Carl and Donut are talking. She's talking about how she's wearing this mask, and Carl explains that she's wearing it and she's not going to be able to take it off anytime soon. And she says, I don't like it, Carl. And that was such a powerful moment in the series and just really made me cry. And I think from there is things just keep getting more and more intense, and the dynamics between these characters, the close bonds that they have, it just really keeps ramping up.
Funny
And
enough, I was reading book 7 today, and Rosita actually says that the reason that she decided to go into the dungeon and align herself with Carl was that mask speech, and that it meant a lot to her. Although she said, spoilers, even though this is a spoiler podcast, that Rosetta really felt for them and had a lot of empathy for them because they didn't know yet that the mask never would come off.
yeah, absolutely. Like, and I actually forgot about that part with Rosetta and her relaying that to Carl and Donut.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say that when I first started reading the books, I was mostly reading for Donut because I am a crazy cat lady. I'm very obsessed with cats, and I can admit that. But I think when I really felt the buy-in and was really invested in the series is actually the first time they went on Odette's show. And it became clear that this was more than just going through and punching gerbils, because that's not really my thing. But just the behind the scenes of how they're manipulating people, what it says about our society and social media, and how you have to like create personas and stuff like that. That is when I became extremely interested. And then as the books progressed, I love the interplanetary politics. I love the stuff about the different alien races.
Hard agree.
And that really made the book so much better for me because I'm a completionist for sure, but a lot of people will go on Reddit and they'll be like, well, I've read one book and I'm not that into it. And I'm like, this is a series that absolutely gets better as it goes along, which is why we're starting with book 7 for sure.
And that's definitely a difference between Bri and I. I get hooked by the violence and the video game aspects and how silly and ridiculous it is, and then she gets hooked by the interplanetary politics. That, of course, gets me later on, but that wasn't the initial hook for me.
And I think that's why we're good people to have a podcast, is because I think we are very different and have very different perspectives, both in what we like and also just in the fact that you listen to the audiobooks and I read the book. So I think we definitely have different perspectives that can play off each other and add a lot. The other reason that I am really obsessed with the book is actually because we have our own Princess Show cat. So our cat Neffy is a purebred snowshoe Siamese, and we did get her from a shelter. And when we got her, I just could not comprehend how such a well-behaved, beautiful cat could have ever been in a shelter. And I did think about the people who left them there, and
Well, left her on the street.
she didn't get left on the street.
No. It's more dramatic that way.
Yeah, definitely. And don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I have considered both the thought process of what would have to go through someone's brain before they dropped a perfect, beautiful, wonderful cat off at the shelter. And I've also thought about, does my cat have trauma from this? How does she feel about it? Was this awful for her? And so seeing both sides of that play out in the book was really meaningful to me in a way that I don't think that everyone can quite understand.
We went to Dragon Con last month in September. It's the third largest sci-fi and fantasy convention in the US here in Atlanta. And we were super stoked going into it because we are really obsessed with Dungeon Crawler Carl. And we decided to dress up as Princess Donut and Carl. And we kind of decided we were going to center our whole con experience around that.
Yeah, it was definitely the it thing this year. That and Claire Obscure, which is a video game, were the two hot things at Dragon Con this year. More people were dressed up as those characters than anything else. We went to a Dungeon Crawler Carl photo shoot that had maybe about 500 people. Somebody went through and counted, and there was a photo that was just Carl. It was about 180 people, and I think there was about 120 donuts.
Right. And there were some other really good cosplays as well. Someone dressed up as Orin, which, like, amazing costume. There was a sexy Mongo that was phenomenal.
Yeah, we live in Atlanta where it's really hot, so we have to have sexy everything.
Right. We really do. So there's going to be a few panels throughout the weekend that we were going to attend. And the first one, it was apparent right away how popular it was.
I got in line an hour and a half early.
Yeah. And another one of them, the line, there was probably like 700 people in line, and there was a person who was managing the line, and she was basically crying because I think there was way more people than she expected to show up. One of the great experiences was at this sidekick panel where they were discussing the role that sidekicks play in different stories, and they were discussing what happens when a sidekick becomes such a big character that they start to actually outshine the main character of the story. And Matt had a really funny comment about this. He said that he decided that he was going to write the entire book series from the perspective of the sidekick, and even went so far as to name the book series after the sidekick Carl.
Yeah, that was hilarious. But it was really fun because we had a Samantha head that was part of our costume, and we basically had this doll with a huge hole in it, and we were like, we need to put something in the Nessie. So we had Nessie candy, and I did get to give Matt Nessie candy, which I went up to him and I was like, "Hi, Matt, do you want some Nessie candy?" And he was like, "Fuck yes, I want Nessie candy."
And he said, you know what? I put Nussie in the book one time. Now everybody is obsessed with it. So we just throughout the whole weekend, we were interacting with fans and talking to people. And so many people said that they had finished the series and then have already read through it or listened through it 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And it was just a really cool experience, but it was glaringly obvious and apparent that there was a lot of hunger for more content. And that was when we kind of had the idea that, hey, we should start a podcast about this.
Yeah, and it was so much fun getting to meet all the other Donuts and Carls, but we really wanted to set up the Dragon Con experience because we will be referencing information that we got from one of those panels.
Right. And that's where we're going to end things for today. Next episode, we're going to be starting our discussion of Book 7 and start really getting into the nitty-gritty of everything. But please be gentle with us as we're starting with Polly's chapter, which is very complicated, and we're going to be getting into the differences between the different factions of residuals. So it's a lot. It's daunting.
Definitely, but I will say it has been reassuring to go back and read some old threads that I think everyone is wrong on their theories sometimes, and that is kind of the nature of a unfinished series and a series where the narrator is supposed to be somewhat unreliable.
Absolutely. Well,
thank you for listening to the Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted.
New achievement. You've listened to another episode of The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted. We release new episodes every Sunday. Visit us on our website to find all our podcast platforms, rss.com/podcasts/The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted. Or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, the iHeartRadio app, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Facebook at The Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted and on Instagram at Apocalypse Will Be Podcasted. Now, get out there and like, comment, and subscribe.